This is Poprint, an animal rescue community, episode 55. I'm Nancy Rhee.
And I'm Harold Rhee. Today's guest is Thomas English.
I think you would be hard-pressed to find more people that give more of themselves and their lives to try to help companion animals than you would find in the South. There's a tremendous number of people down here that basically devote their entire life, all their resources, to trying to make a difference.
Tom is a math professor with a Texas-sized heart for animal welfare in Galveston County, Texas, just south of Houston.
After moving to the Galveston area, he witnessed animals suffering in overcrowded conditions at his local animal shelter. Tom was mentioned in Rescue Road, the New York Times best-selling book about Greg Mahle, written by Peter Zheutlin.
Greg and Peter were both previous guests on our show.
Tom offers his wisdom and insights from his years of helping save thousands of animals.
If you want to learn more about Tom English, including information on the vaccinations he uses in his work, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/55. That's the number 55.
I'm Tom English, and I am a mathematics professor here in Texas who grew up in the Northeast. I grew up in Pennsylvania, went to graduate school in New York State in Buffalo, and also in New Hampshire at the University of New Hampshire. When I was in my mid-20s, I moved to the South, first to Florida, and then when I'm in my early 30s, I moved here to Texas. I'm in the Houston area. And I've discovered things that I never really knew existed in the United States. The deplorable conditions of companion animal welfare that we have in a large part of the South, and certainly in my part of Texas. And so I kind of became consumed by this atrocity as I saw it, and in trying to make a difference. So that's where I've expended a great deal of my time and energy over the past 10 years.
Has it changed in any way in those 10 years?
It has, and it has changed in a positive way. There's a tremendous amount of work going on in the South to try to improve conditions. A lot of people are working very, very hard. And it's kind of paradoxical because I think that if you look at the overall welfare of animals in the North, particularly the Northeast or the Pacific Northwest, and compare that to the Deep South, clearly animals have much better level of care in the northern areas of our country. And so one might believe, looking at that it obviously follows that people just care more in the North than they do in the South. But paradoxically, I think you would be hard-pressed to find more people that give more of themselves and their lives to try to help companion animals than you would find in the South. There's a tremendous number of people down here that basically devote their entire life, all their resources, to trying to make a difference. And I don't think you see that in the North to the same degree because the conditions are not nearly as bad.
Right.
I have devoted a tremendous amount of my own time and energy over the past 10 years, but there's certainly many people that have devoted even more than I have, much more than I have, to the point where it ruins lives. I've seen many people's lives ruined by this all-consuming effort to try to save lives and to make a difference and to change the community. It really doesn't leave anyone unscarred. It hurts the people that are caring the most and trying to do the most good, end up basically giving so much of themselves that they end up losing a big part of themselves in the process. And it takes a rare person that can really balance all of the skills needed to make it work.
I mean, are there people that you have seen who actually can walk that fine line?
Yes, there are. And
really?
I am in amazement when I see these people. And I try to help out people that can do a good job. I try to encourage them to keep doing what they're doing and stay the course and not get overwhelmed. And I try to avoid people that are obviously not equipped to do it. I don't want to encourage them to take on more than they can do. Let me tell you how it was 10 years ago when I first got started, because that's really when I realized everything at its worst. 10 years ago, I first stepped into our county shelter here in Galveston County, Texas. I had never been there before. This was a shelter that serves several 100,000 people in the community. Their intake would be approximately 10,000 dogs per year and several thousand cats. They were euthanizing just about every dog that entered their facility. So about 10,000 dogs a year were being euthanized. When I visited the shelter, what I found was basically a dungeon. There were no windows. There was leaking air conditioning, so the place was constantly damp. And there were 38 kennels. 38 kennels to translate 10,000 dogs through in a year.
It's not nearly enough.
Not nearly enough. And they were all filthy. There were multiple dogs stuffed into each kennel, and every dog in the facility was sick. Every dog was sick. That's the day that I started rescue, was that first visit. I ended up leaving with 4 big dogs that day. I figured I'd find a way. I just couldn't let them die there. And I left with 2 lab mixes and 2 Rottweilers. All 4 of them were sick. They all had upper respiratory infections, which in one of the Rottweilers developed into pneumonia. They all were covered with fleas. They were all heartworm positive, which wasn't the shelter's fault, but that was the condition they came in. They had eye infections, ear infections, and were basically miserable. Nothing was given to them. No flea prevention, no worming, no vaccines whatsoever. So that's the condition we lived with here for a number of years. Since then, a number of positive things have occurred. One is that we managed to get a bond issue passed in our county that built a new facility, an animal welfare center, which has, I think, about 200 kennels as opposed to the 38 original.
Wow.
That's a good thing. It made a big difference in the health of the animals. The second thing is we managed to secure some funding through a bingo facility in the state of Texas. Any kind of gaming operation like a bingo parlor has to be owned by a nonprofit or held by a nonprofit. Otherwise, it's considered ill-gotten goods, I guess. So we put up some seed money and we bought into a portion of a bingo parlor that was opening. And the profits from that bingo parlor then go to the nonprofit. And from there, they're distributed to buying supplies for the shelter, such as vaccines. And so at this point now, animals actually get vaccinated at the shelter. And this goes a long way to stemming the tide of disease that we were seeing in our county. When I was first taking dogs from that shelter almost 10 years ago, there was one year that I took 100 dogs from that shelter. And of those 100 dogs, 33 of them died.
Oh.
And they died of parvo, distemper, or both. A few of them actually had both parvo and distemper. Clearly, this could have been prevented if the shelter had been providing vaccines to the dogs on intake. And many of these dogs were adult dogs. They had good, strong immune systems that would respond to vaccines very quickly. But they were not provided the vaccines when they entered the facility, so they ended up dying. Instead of me pulling 100 dogs out of the shelter and saving 66 of them and spending thousands of dollars to try to save the lives of the 33 that were dying, maybe I should try to focus more on getting them to vaccinate the dogs on intake, getting a new shelter facility, providing healthy animals for all of the rescues to be pulling from the shelter. And so that was a big part of the push over the past years, was developing vaccine programs for various shelters where we could provide vaccines to them at low cost or free, and getting them to adhere to a protocol that was designed by shelter medicine veterinarians and would provide for the best possible safety of the animals while they go into a shelter.
Now with the improved facilities, with the funding that you're able to receive, can you kind of take a breath, do you feel like? Or is it still just an overwhelming situation?
Thankfully, I have. taken a breath. A lot of that work that was done to make those changes occur, I provided some assistance with, some seed money or some push in a certain direction, but most of that work was done by other people, in fact. So that was not too hard. I have really focused my work on developing a rescue program to high quality, proper care, proper assessment adoptions to out-of-state, to New England, and to the Pacific Northwest, which I have helped several other rescues to then get on board in doing that, and kind of stepped back from that now, and I provide some assistance with it, but I'm not really directly fostering and rescuing dogs quite as much as I used to. And also focusing my efforts on helping one particular shelter in Texas, our Brazoria County shelter, which is a rural county just south of us, which does not have nearly the resources that Galveston County does. They don't have any low-cost spay-neuter clinics in the entire county, for example, and the shelter, basically, the county does not provide anything for the animals except for 1 week's worth of dog food, and that's it. So we're able to provide everything.
Oh, great.
To make up the difference there. I buy a very large quantity of vaccines each year, perhaps 25 to 30,000 doses of vaccines.
Oh, thank you. Well, amazing.
And by buying in bulk like that, I get a greatly reduced price.
Sure.
So I don't have to get them all at once. I just have to, throughout the year, have incurred that total.
Right.
And so I can place an order for 50 vaccines or 500 vaccines, whatever is needed at a time, and they're shipped directly to me from the manufacturer. I can deliver them to whoever needs them.
Yeah.
And so I can provide this now to basically any rescue or any shelter in the area, and we have about a half a dozen of each that take part in this. They can buy the vaccines from me at the same cost that I pay, which is about half of the cost they would pay on their own if they were to try to buy these.
Tell us the name of your rescue organization, if it's a 501c3.
I have a couple of different names that I operate under, depending on specifically what I'm doing. I tend to refer to what I'm doing as Shelter Buddies, because the focus is I want to help shelters to have the resources to do a really good job of taking care of the animals, keeping them healthy so that rescues can get a healthy animal when they rescue it and not have to deal with the tremendous amount of sickness that I had seen in my past. Other times, I would use the name Canine Airlift Incorporated, which is a 501c3 that I am affiliated with, that a couple of friends run, and we work together to make sure that we can get the accounts set up that are needed to make these programs run.
Sounds like those are the main two organizations that you tend to work under. Now that you've been doing this for 10 years, you've seen a lot of changes, you've obviously made in your own way an impact. If someone was listening to this, what would you recommend folks start doing? Maybe
I can address it from the point of view of if someone wanted to help the worst possible conditions in the country, which would be the Deep South, what would they do? Well, barring moving here, which I don't recommend that someone who is that motivated by animal welfare that I might say you probably don't want to move here because it would be too heartbreaking to you at times. But if you wanted to do something from a distance, I think that promoting adoption and promoting adoption from high-quality rescues throughout the country and not feeling like you have to purchase an animal in your local community and you could adopt instead would be the best thing to do. It dawned on me pretty quickly, being a displaced Yankee in the South, that people really may never want to change the way things are. And I've heard this even from a lot of rescuers who were born here and raised here. They basically have the attitude, well, that's the way it is, and that's the way it's always been, and there's really nothing we can do about it. And I think that that's wrong. I've lived places where we don't have these problems, and I think we can do something about it, and I think conditions can be much better. And I think that having enough people across the country pay attention to the plight of animals in the South is going to make a difference. And so that's why I've always been very hopeful about things like, for example, Rescue Road, the book that Peter Zheutlin has put out, where he describes the animals in the South being transported to the North and the conditions in the South, and hoping that people in the North learn about this and care enough to be outraged about it, and to say on the national level, we as a country need to do something about this. It's not acceptable that we're killing millions of companion animals in the South, when in our community we realize that this is the wrong thing to do. And we cannot just stand by and say, well, that's the South, they do things differently. We have to push them to do the right thing, to take the moral stance. It certainly has worked on other issues, and it can work on this one too.
We're talking to Tom English. He lives in Texas, and he has his own animal rescue hero story. He also mentions Rescue Road, a book written by Peter Zheutlin. And, of course, in case you were wondering, Tom is actually you're briefly mentioned in the book, right?
I believe so, yes.
What was that process like, either meeting folks like, if you did meet with him one-on-one, Peter Zheutlin, Greg Mahle?
I can tell you a little bit about meeting Greg. It's very interesting. Somehow I got into a situation where there were several Rottweilers here in Texas, and there was a rescue in New Hampshire that was willing to take them. A rescue in Austin, which is about 3 hours or 3.5 hours from us, was rescuing these dogs in Houston, and I had heard about it, and I said, do you need any assistance? And this was early on in my animal welfare work, and I have a particular fondness for Rottweilers, so I wanted to offer any kind of help that I could. And I ended up taking the 3 dogs in to board at my house and helping them to get a little healthier before they made their trip. As it turned out, they were going to be transported to New Hampshire by Greg Mahle and Rescue Road Trips. So I made the drive to meet Greg and to transfer the dogs to him. And back then, he was driving in 2 little vans. And he would pack the dogs into these little vans and their crates and drive them up to New England. And I remember talking with him that first night. And I was very excited, this idea that I had tried to do adoptions in Texas for about 2 years prior to that meeting, and it's an extremely slow process, very, very difficult to find adopters because there's just so many dogs to choose from that it's a buyer's market, if you will. And the idea that there was a group that was happily take these 3 Rottweilers to New Hampshire, a state I used to live in and knew well and loved, just really excited me. So I asked Greg, what can you tell me about this process? Is there another way that I could be helping dogs to get out of Texas and get to New England? And Greg mentioned Labs for Rescue to me. And so I was very excited about that because I often would see lots of Labrador retrievers at the shelter and beautiful dogs. And I really thought, hey, if there's an opportunity to get some of these great labs up, I would be really happy to do that. So I emailed Labs for Rescue that night as soon as I got home, and Kathy, who runs Labs for Rescue, wrote back and said that they would consider working with me. Now, Labs for Rescue tries to be careful. They don't want to just say to anyone, yeah, we'll take your dogs. We had to do a little bit of a trial work here and make sure that everything was going to be done to the right standards, and we got that worked out, and I started to be able to send Labrador retrievers up to Connecticut. That's when I really became hooked on this idea, because what I would find is Labrador retrievers that maybe sit here for a year or more waiting to find an adopter would find an adopter through Labs for Rescue in a matter of 2 days. I would go pull 4 or 5 Labrador retrievers at a time from a shelter and work hard to get them, medically ready to travel, all their vetting done. As soon as they were ready to travel, they would have adopters waiting for them.
Wow.
It just seemed like a miracle to me.
What did you think about the book? For those who don't know, Rescue Road really does kind of profile Greg Mahle, But there are definitely plenty of other chapters that focus on folks like yourself, right? The folks who are connecting these dogs to eventually a trip to the Northeast.
Here's a little bit of an embarrassing admission. Peter came and stayed with me for several days while he was writing the book, and I gave him a tour around and explained how things worked here, and he met some of the other people in the Houston area that I know he wrote about. So, of course, I'm very excited to get any kind of press out to the north about the conditions in the South, as I mentioned. I think this is critical to making a difference. But when Peter sent me that book, I couldn't bring myself to read it. I have the book sitting here. It has sat here since before it was released. It was one of the early runs of it that I got, and I just can't bring myself to read it.
It's positive, but it's tough. Friends
of mine have read it. My girlfriend read it, but I just could not bring myself to read one word of it, and it may be hard to understand, but having gone through all of this stuff, I don't want to go through any more of it than I have to. A trauma that you don't want to relive in any way. And so I try to avoid it by not reading it. And I feel bad about it because I really appreciate Peter's work. I would imagine it's a wonderful book. And all my friends tell me it's great and that they really appreciate reading the book and such, but I'm just not ready yet to read it.
I think it's so important to really just acknowledge this is really hard work.
It's extremely hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Any specific animals that have really inspired you or made a big impact on you?
Yeah, a couple. As a child, I think I was 8 years old when I begged my mother to allow us to adopt a puppy. And so in Erie, Pennsylvania, I was 8 years old back in the 1970s. We traveled to the Erie Humane Society and adopted a puppy. So we kind of grew up together. That little boy, Midnight, was my best friend as a kid. And I learned from him some pretty amazing things about animals. I learned that animals have the full range of emotions that people have, because I could see that very clearly in him. And I learned that he could understand just about anything we said. He was around us so much and ingrained in our lives completely, and he basically understood everything that we talked about. He knew who was coming over. If we talked about somebody coming over, he knew who to expect. If we were going someplace, he knew where we were going. He just knew these things because he could understand what we were saying. So it really drove home to me that these other beings basically have all of our facilities, except for the ability to talk. And, maybe they're saving grace, I guess, because they don't learn how to do things like lie. He's the one that really convinced me that humans need to be treating other animals much more humanely than we are. So at the age of 19, I actually became a vegetarian and started to become more interested in animal welfare. It wasn't until I moved to the South, though, that I really got involved in such things. When I finally settled down and bought a home, the first thing I wanted to do was to get a dog again. So now I was in my early 30s, I guess. And I adopted a dog from a co-worker at the college where I teach, a 10-and-a-half-month-old Rottweiler named Bo. And it was like the same thing again as being a child. Here is this other being that I developed this incredibly strong connection with, who could seem to understand anything I said, anything I was feeling, and could communicate his emotions with me in just the purest, simplest way. Just an incredible bond there. And I think those were the two in my life, the two times where I felt the strongest connection with another being, were with those two. I think that being an adult and having Bo was really what spurred me to care about all these other dogs that I was seeing in distress, to realize that they all had the same potential as him, and yet they were being treated so horribly in our community.
Right.
Made me want to get involved.
Midnight and Bo, two wonderful rescue stories. Thank you. Up here in Northern California, when you visit shelters, you're going to see a lot of Chihuahua mixes and Pit Bull mixes.
We certainly still get the Chihuahua mixes and the Pit Bull mixes, quite a few. But there are also a lot of other breeds. We see a good number of purebred Labrador Retrievers with nice manners and some basic training. Very sweet dogs, the type of dog that you think could just walk into any home and just be perfect. And lots of other purebred dogs, purebred German Shepherds, purebred Rottweilers, and a lot of the small breeds too, the Shih Tzus and Maltese and even Yorkies every once in a while will come into the shelters. So almost every breed you can imagine ends up needing a rescue at one time or another.
Right.
And there's a few that are rare. For example, an Irish setter would be a rare dog. I think out of the 2,100 or so dogs that have passed through my hands, I think one was an Irish setter. And that kind of stood out because that happens to be Greg Mahle's favorite.
Yeah, that's right.
So he just melted. He melted when he met that girl for transport.
That's great. You see thousands of dogs, unfortunately, hundreds, thousands of dogs who are euthanized. Were there any particular stories that just really come to mind?
Thankfully, I have learned how to protect myself from seeing too many dogs that are going to die. And the way I've done that is to isolate my own particular work in a shelter to one shelter. And in that one shelter, what I do is I go in and I do their photography. I try to do high-quality photographs of all the animals.
Oh, wow.
We also do testing, and this is the same shelter where we provide all the vaccines, all the worming, heartworm prevention, flea prevention, basic medications for pain or infections when they come in, things like that. So we try to really do a comprehensive care for the animals, and the only reason we can do this is because the shelter is willing to allow us to do it. The people that are working there really want to make a difference, and it's a small enough shelter that everybody can get on board and do it. They may take in, say 1,000 dogs a year, dogs and puppies, and maybe a couple hundred cats. So a much smaller number than one would encounter in one of the larger shelters around here. For those 1,000 animals, I do the photography. I review everything to make sure that, if they have any medical conditions, that we make sure that we let rescuers know what that condition is. For example, we will encounter broken legs. A dog might get hit by a car and have a broken leg. Once in a while, I'll take that dog myself if I can. If not, we'll say, here, this dog has a broken leg. It's going to need to go to the vet. If you can help, please help. And a rescue often will step forward and say, yeah, I can do that. We also do the testing on each animal. We test them for heartworm disease for all the dogs over 5 months age, and all of the cats and kittens get tested for feline combo diseases, feline leukemia and FIV. So because we do that, the rescuers know that they're going to get reliable information about the dogs. They're going to get a good photo of the dog that shows what the dog actually looks like. They develop this rapport with the shelter, and they feel comfortable going there to rescue animals. A large number of those animals actually end up going to Colorado because of the photos and because of the testing and all of the medical care that's gone into them at the shelter. They're healthy. We have a volunteer vet that comes in, does health certificates for the animals for free, and they can travel to Colorado on a transport. Thankfully, the vast majority of animals that I see at that shelter do not get euthanized.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty heartwarming, actually, when you see that going on. The shelter that I don't go to, the one that we did help to get a new shelter built, they were euthanizing about 10,000 dogs a year. Now they're at about 2,000 dogs a year.
Right. Big improvement.
Yeah, so that is a big improvement even in that facility.
What other things do you do for yourself to prevent burnout, to prevent really this tough journey that you've taken to really bring you down, right?
Let me address that as, what am I trying to do to recover from burnout? Because most certainly, without a doubt, I have burned out in my life. And so what have I done to try to recover? Well, one thing was to restrict myself in my activities to doing the work that I'm doing of support to the shelter as opposed to direct rescue. So it's no longer the case that I'm going to be taking in hundreds and hundreds of dogs every year to my house. I have a more set schedule now. I kind of go to the shelter several times per week on a set schedule. I spend 1 to 2 hours there doing my photography and my blood draws, and occasionally looking at a dog in need to say, here's what I think we should do for this dog. Going home and then spending another hour or two editing photos and preparing blood vials to go to the lab and things like that. It's a much more relaxed schedule because of that. So I think just learning moderation, that I don't have to be the one to do everything, is the key to trying to recover from this burnout process. And that's why it's important to work with other people that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so I can provide my particular skill set, and they can then benefit from the fact that they get healthy dogs that are properly tested, have good photos, and they can go from there to move them to shelters and rescues out of state that can help to find them good homes. You know, I just want to be a little cog in the machine that does this. I don't want to be the machine anymore.
Right. When you think deep down inside, why do you do what you do?
I oftentimes think about that, laying in bed at night wondering, why do I do this? What is it that makes me do this? And I don't know. Sometimes I think it's a defect, that maybe I don't think I'm worthy of living a normal life where I just am a little more hedonistic and think of myself first. So maybe that's sort of when I'm feeling negative about myself, I think that way. But I think probably more realistically that it's just a struggle to find value in life. I think we all wonder why we exist. Why do we bother to exist? Is there any point to our lives? And certainly, if you think about thousands of dogs being euthanized, just rounded up and euthanized, it certainly doesn't seem there's much point to their lives. And so maybe by trying to provide more of a poignant life for them, I'm trying to see that life is more poignant for myself as well. I don't know. Yeah, I think that we all wonder that. Why do we do this? And I don't think any of us know for sure. But we feel like it's the right thing to do, and we feel like we're able to do it. And if we're able to do it, then we kind of have to do it. It's an obligation.
Yeah. Someone just asks you off the top of your head, or at a party, why should I consider adopting an animal from an animal rescue? What would you say?
Well, the main reason you should consider adopting an animal is because you want to have a companion animal in your life. I think that people should not adopt animals just for the sake of saving a life. They should adopt an animal because they want to have that companion in their life. And once you go from there, you're realizing that the reason you want to have an animal in your life is to have a companion to love. The next logical thing is you want to respect that animal. And you want to respect that they did not come from a breeding situation where they were being exploited, and instead you were helping them to get out of a bad situation. That's why we adopt.
Anything else that you'd like to share?
Just want to say thank you to you to spread the word throughout the country about conditions in the South, in the hopes that people all over the U.S. will care about this enough to be a little bit outraged and push to change things on a national level. So I think that's really what it takes in this country to make a difference.
We want to say thank you to Thomas English for sharing his story and for the incredible dedication he gives to the dogs and cats in his life. And we want to say thank you to author Peter Zheutlin for connecting us with Tom. We also want to say thank you to Pam Belanger and Greg Mahle for their support. If you want to learn more about Tom or the New York Times bestseller Rescue Road, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/55. If you'd like to nominate someone to be a guest on our show, you can simply email us at thisispawprint@gmail.com or go to our contact page at thisispawprint.com/contact. If you want to listen to more episodes of Paw Print, you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest episodes immediately. If you'd like to meet me or Nancy on social media, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, look for This Is Paw Print, all one word. We do have a free bonus of dog training materials from our favorite positive reinforcement dog trainer, Irit Bloom. Simply go to thisispawprint.com/ask to sign up. We want to say thank you to all of you, our listeners out there, for sharing Paw Print with your friends and family. Remember that you spread a positive message of love and peace by saving an animal. Have a great day, everyone, and see you next time with another great guest on Paw Print.
Is a production of EVER Education.
You can't handle the truth.